Okay, we are up to the final letter, which is letter number 32 of the collection of letters. Now, just a brief reminder, these letters are culled from many, many communal letters which the Alter Rebbe wrote and were incorporated in what we call Tanya, which is a combination of numerous books by the Alter Rebbe's children. So the Alter Rebbe did not choose these letters specifically, and sometimes the letters were even rearranged and a little bit of cut and paste to make them as they appear here. So the fact that they were deliberately chosen to be the last letter of this series gives us another portal of entry into an insight as to what it is that they hoped to accomplish with this letter and how it's being the bookend, the concluding letter, is also, again, a life lesson. This letter was written in 5571, which corresponds to 1810 or 1811. And it's chosen by the children as a bookend to the very first letter. Now, we'll see a couple of other parallels, and this is a not uncommon theme that we find in Torah in general. We find it in Parshas, we find it in volumes of the Talmud, where there's a certain symmetry of the end and the beginning being wedged together. Now, the very first letter of this series, we're in letter 32, speaks about davening as being an opportunity for us to express the infinity that is ordinarily contained within our finity. Our humanity is finite, our neshama is infinite, and the two of them make some friction. And davening is an opportunity for the infinity of our neshama to be expressed through the finity, the rigidity of our humanity. Now, this letter is going to speak about a similar objective when, and as it is, an appeal not only for tzedakah, but for the appeal for tzedakah. That is, speaking about prompting others to get over themselves, which tzedakah is a very profound form of doing that. I mean, the body says, the human says, the animating soul says, this is mine, I want it, I'm keeping it. And then I spend it sparingly. So if I want to buy something, I spend it. If I don't want, if I don't want it, then I don't spend it. It's mine. So the objective of, or the value or the impact of tzedakah is I get over my own self-concern. Instead of thinking about what's in it for me, I think about what can I do to provide, which itself can be a process like davening where I squeeze the infinite out of my finite. Now, this letter is going to use as, again, a framework to get into this discussion, a grammatical issue. It's actually relevant to the parsha we had. Sarai's name is changed to Sarah. The hey suffix is the feminization of the root word. The word sar, sin resh, means like an officer or a person of stature. The yud suffix, sarai, means it's mine. Sarah is the feminization of it. So we have the word tzedek, which we translate as justice, and we have the word tzedakah with the hey suffix, which is a feminization of that word. What is the feminine quality of tzedakah? So as our general rule of thumb, that feminine is transforming nature into art. That is, it takes the raw material that God provides in the world and it transforms it into something of greater use and value. Or the simple metaphor, the husband provides the wheat and the wife turns the wheat into bread. So how this plays out in the concept of tzedakah in contrast to tzedek will be, again, one of those ideas. And what this letter focuses on, again, as we've seen many times, is what we might refer to as, or I will refer to as, the spiritual side of tzedakah, not just the practical side, but what's going on in the spiritual side. And here in particular, about those who have the capacity or the opportunity to inspire others to give tzedakah. Now, this letter is in response to the virtuous practice of people inspiring others to give tzedakah, and again, primarily for the Kollel Chabad Fund, which we've discussed many times, which continues to operate to this very day, about providing for basic care for the colony of Hasidim who first came to Eretz Yisrael, whose families still live there to this very day. And again, it parallels the first letter where it speaks about in praise of the communal practice of dividing up the Talmud into communal study, which we continue to this day, usually on Yotes Kislev, where everybody takes a few chapters or a whole volume of the Talmud, and collectively the community completes the entirety of the Talmud. So again, we see a lot of these parallels, and the fact that the children chose to put this letter here gives us another opportunity for insight and life lesson. So here we go. Chapter 32, or letter 32. Barech Hashem chelam ufail yodam yeratza. So it begins with a blessing. Blessed, God should bless his soldiers, not just in a military sense, but his mighty ones. And the acts of their hands should be desirous. So as we often do, it begins with the bracha for what they have accomplished, and which is sort of a congratulatory form of bracha, as well as what we might describe as a well wish for the future. As this verse ends, Yiratzeh should be desirous. And again, that's how the letter number 1 begins, Poischin bebracha. We begin with the bracha. And again, there in that context, in letter number 1, it's the Alter Rebbe giving a bracha to the community for their communal study activities. So again, we see this parallel that we acknowledge the activity, and we use this as a spur to go further. We see this so often from our Rebbe. People would report they did something wonderful, and the Rebbe would say, now do twice as much. So on the surface, you might say, whoa, when I didn't do good. Well, the analogy would be if somebody made $1 million this year, and I told him, I hope next year you make 2 million, he's not going to be insulted. Yeah, right. And this is the surefire sign of holiness. When we do virtuous things, we should be propelled and prompted to do more virtuous things, and not to rest and say, oh, look what I did. Now I can stop. On the contrary, he should be prompted to go from what he's done to do even that much more. L'rotzon lehem lifnei Hashem, that they should be desirous before God. Hoi yitain b'koi Yosef, they should continue to be added to and to be increased upon. La'ametz liban b'giburim, to strengthen their heart with a mightiness. And again, as we would expect, the bracha is not just the congratulatory form of a blessing, like good job. It's that prompt to move forward and to do something that much better with the gift that you have been given. V'nedivim v'nediv al nidivas yikoim, and those who have so dedicated themselves with the dedication of their heart, liyos gadol hamaisa b'chol ir, as we see how great a matter this is, that is done in every city. Now here, there's a little bit of a punctuation or vowelization, better, nuance. The phrase reads, liyos gadol hamasa, the greatness of, and the word masa we know is an activity, but it could also be read a little bit differently. As we are familiar, every Hebrew word is premised around, is built off a platform of a 2 or 3 letter shoresh or root word. And then, depending on the prefixes or suffixes and the vowelization, it takes on a different meaning. Now, sometimes it seems very a far stretch from the original word, which becomes another opportunity for insight. So the root word here of this word is aseh, ayin, sin, hey. We recognize this word. It's a word we use commonly. Oseh shalom bimromav, may he make, to do. This is what he should do. This is what you do. What did he do? All in that form. Now, another form of that word is a word that we use, a maisa. A maisa we translate as a story. But a story is telling about something that was done. So you can see the connection there. So we might read this as Gadol Hamaisa, it is a great thing in every city. But here we're reading it a little bit differently. Not Maisa as in an event or an occurrence, but Ma'asa, meaning the one who compels others to do. Again, the root word being aseh, to do. Ma'aseh is to compel others to do. Now, this may offend our sort of very Western sense, which is predicated on don't tell me what to do. And we have a very strong sense of our independence, in a large part because I think in our Western culture, we don't really trust anybody who tells us what to do. We just think of them as bullies or self-important or just doing it for themselves and so on. It's very hard to find someone whom we can trust to simply follow when what they do. Now, hopefully, that's not the case, and that people have found teachers, instructors, coaches, inspirers who compel them to do things that they may be resistant to, and yet they are prompted by it. They are inspired. I think the previous Rebbe said, you can't tell American Jewry to do anything, but you can inspire them to do everything. We have a curious halachic description. There's a discussion, which is greater, to do what you are told to do, what you are commanded to do, or to do what you have not been commanded to do something voluntarily. And the Talmud concludes that it is greater to do what you have been commanded to do. And there's a lot of discussion as to why that is. Amongst the interpretations, one is because we have a natural resistance, a form of don't tell me what to do. When we overcome that and we do what we're told to do, there is something wonderful about that we submit ourselves to following instructions that have been given to us. Quote, don't tell me what to do is offset when we do what we are told to do. So in context here, the Alter Rebbe is sort of referencing a quote from the Talmud. In the Talmud, in Baba Basra 9a, it describes the mitzvah of tzedakah. And there it talks about a Rebbe Lazar who says that one who is ma'aseh, again, on the straightforward level, we might translate as forces or compels, but we don't like that word. So we would say inspires or prompts, something a little softer. But really, that's what it means. It means to make the person do it. Now, it doesn't mean that they're doing it unwillingly, but it is the one who prompts them to do it. But again, it's very offensive to our American sensibilities. So don't tell me what to do, and I only do what I want to do. But be that as it may. But one, the Rebbe Lezer says, one who is, and again, using this word, ma'aseh, they compel, force, whatever it is, a meritorious act is even greater than the one who does the act himself. And this is based on a pasuk. It's from the book of Yeshaya, chapter 32, pasuk 17, Yud Zayin, that says, uses this word, ma'aseh, that the one who is ma'aseh, who causes, who propels, who compels, who forces, who makes, all of that word that we've gone over, of righteousness shall be peace, and the work of righteousness, quietness, and assurance forever. That's the pasuk. It's, again, Yeshaya chapter 32, pasuk 17. What we see here is that there is a great virtue to being the one who propels the mitzvah. People are probably familiar with the metaphor of the guy who discovers the person lying in the snow, and he spends all night rubbing his body to keep him warm. And in the morning, when they're rescued, the one who is being rescued says, oh, thank you, saved my life. He says, no, you saved my life, because by rubbing you to be warm, I stayed warm. And all of these appropriate analogies of the yeshiva bacher standing on the street corner for hours to put on tefillin with people. Not only is the person who puts on the tefillin uplifted, the person who stood there and prompted him is similarly uplifted as well. That the cause is, in a sense, more profound than the resultant entity. So not only is the person who does the mitzvah doing something wonderful, but the one who prompts him to do the mitzvah, compels, all those words, is similarly also uplifted. So here the Alter Rebbe says, Hama'aseh, the compeller, b'chol ear in every city, or minion in every community or group, it is considered to him, that is, the persuader, to be a tzedakah. Now here the Alter Rebbe says, "V'alo oisa nemetzit kosoi medis la'ad, oy medis loshen nekeva, shemakabel hisuris libay hatohor migodel hamaisa, afal pikein and medis la'ad." See here, the Alter Rebbe uses a grammatical nuance as an entryway into understanding this idea. Now, again, the word is translated as forced or compelled, but it doesn't mean I'm beating it out of him. It doesn't mean that I am forcing him literally by physical or communal humiliation. It means prompted, inspired, uplifted. It is in that sort of cooperative sense. The idea being that if I can persuade someone else to do a mitzvah, that it should be litzedakah, and the hey, the feminine, that's the key to this framework. Because if I'm forcing him, then he has no real merit in it. This is a lengthier sort of sidebar discussion halachically. If somebody does a mitzvah purely out of compulsion, that is, they tell him, if you don't eat the matzah, I'm going to beat you up, is he in fact doing a mitzvah? It's a discussion back and forth and back and forth. But here we're talking about where the person is prompted to do so. So it's both a schus, as it is for the one who does it, as the one who persuades him to do it. And the feminine quality, which is indicated not only by the word tzedakah with the hey suffix, but in Hebrew, the verbs also have gender. I think it's that way in many other languages. It's not that way in English, but in other languages, the verbs and nouns have gender as well. So the pasuk uses the feminine verb omedes with a suffix, the letter suf, as the suffix, which feminizes the verb. So this is further emphasis that this is a feminine word, and it's not random. Why is this word a feminine word and that word is a masculine word when they don't seem to have any feminine or masculine distinctive quality? Well, this is the deep dive that we're doing here to say that this is not just some sort of random assignment that this word is considered feminine, this word is considered masculine. There is some indication into the true meaning of this word that is illustrated, or we have access to it, let's put it that way, by its feminine or masculine quality. Now, again, at an oversimplification, the distinction between the masculine and the feminine is the masculine provides the raw material, the wheat, and the feminine transforms nature into art, turns the wheat into bread. So the feminine is in response to that which has been given. This is why we refer to God as the masculine and the Jewish people as the feminine. God provides the raw material, God creates the world, but the world is chaotic and void, and it is human beings who transform the world into a place that is welcoming of God. So, yes, there is a certain beauty in the raw nature, but we're not here just to admire the raw nature. We could harm it and make negative things, but the objective is to transform nature into art. That's the masculine, that's the masculine feminine dynamic. So in this context, why are we referring to this tzedakah as omedes with a suffix, a feminine suffix, indicating that it's a feminine verb, which means that the noun that is being acted upon is a feminine noun. And the concept is that it is prompted by somebody else. That somebody, in this case, what we refer to as the Gabbai Tzedakah, the secretary of the Tzedakah, who comes and prompts the person to participate, is the sort of masculine, and the person who responds is the feminine, because they are in response. And thus the Alter Rebbe is laying out a spiritual dynamic to this communal practice where you have a prompter and a promptee. You have the secretary, the Gabbai, and the community is responding to the Gabbai's stimulus. That's what's going on. So we continue on, that it comes, as you see, from the purity of his heart. And still, the ma'aseh, the one who is compelling, has got this sort of greater level. So the purity of the heart, again, represents the ultimate objective, the conflux of the spiritual purity of the heart and the physical, the giving of the tzedakah. The two have to come together, blend the holy with the ordinary, so that it squeezes out the neshama from its container within the body. As we mentioned, the first letter speaks about davening, which is also a form of expression of the soul through the body. Well, here it's an expression of the soul through the body because the purity of the heart comes forward. The body is intuitively, essentially, what's in it for me. And the soul is intuitively, what can I contribute? And when the person is prompted to overcome that self-protection of his own, they are forthcoming with that which is of generosity. And that's why it's described as this feminine quality, because in this case, it's in response to somebody who is prompting them to do so. Perish, what this means is, Shekol HaTzedakah v'Chesed, that all of the tzedakah and the chesed. Now, tzedakah and chesed are commonly used somewhat interchangeably. We've probably heard these ideas before. We have it in Torah when Hashem, it's in the Parsha, that when Hashem sort of speaks as a narrator and says, shall I conceal from Abraham what I intend to do, namely the destruction of the cities of Sodom and Amorah and the suburbs, for I know that he will go in the way of God. Oh, what is that? He will instruct his children in the ways of tzedek and mishpat. It doesn't say chesed there, but again, it's similar idea. What is the difference between tzedakah and chesed? Tzedakah, the root word there is tzedek. Tzedek translates as justice. Tzedek, tzedek tirdav, justice you shall pursue. The tzaddik, the righteous person. And chesed is sort of an uncapped. The root of the word chesed is chas, like chas v'shalom, as we say. You may recognize that phrase. It's the same root word. And the root there is what we might translate as compassion, which is a limitless giving. So tzedakah is a formula, and chesed is without formula. I guess that's the way to describe it. It's not an algorithm. It's infinite and infinitely expansive. Okay. She Yisrael Ois Me'elam Hazeh, all of the tzedakah and the chesed that a Jew does in this world. Again, the idea being that it's in this physical world because of our objective to illustrate that there is no innate conflict between the physical and the spiritual. Again, this is a common theme that we've seen throughout Tanya. It doesn't surprise us, but there are, again, pockets within the world of Torah I'm talking about where they don't see it that way, that this world is just a big nuisance, and the only thing that we're interested in is the spiritual. But we don't see it that way in Chabad Hasidus. Again, this doesn't surprise anyone. We're all about how it's the physical and the spiritual are all one and the same. Minidvas libam hatar. Again, it comes from the devotion of their pure heart. So it's not that we're dragging it out of the guy. It's not even like a tax that the person has no choice. Ultimately, the person is inspired. And again, we know this to take it even into our life experience, where a person gives tzedakah not because they're going to get their name on the building. There's a curious illustration of this. The Talmud says that if a person gives tzedakah, and they say, and again, tzedakah is just the simplest tangible expression, and they say explicitly, I'm doing this in order that I have some benefit, that their child should be healthy, whatever it is. So on the surface, this may seem like, oh, that's not pure. So the Gemara says this is a perfectly righteous act. Now, of course, like everything, we have to have a lengthy discussion to understand what this means. And essentially, there are two schools of thought, only two. There are essentially two schools of thought as to why this is the case. One school of thought is the guy doesn't really mean that he's only doing it so he's going to get this reward. He's doing it because it's the right thing to do. Okay, while I'm doing it, if I could get a little bonus, I wouldn't mind it. Just throw that in there. While you're up, if you would get me a cookie, I'd like it. So he doesn't really tie it in to some expectation that he's going to have some sort of consequence or benefit or whatever it is. As the other opinion is that that's why he's doing it. But even if, God forbid, he doesn't get what it is that he hoped for, he doesn't regret it. He doesn't say, you know what, I wish I wouldn't have done that. If a person buys a stock and the stock loses money, he doesn't say, well, I'm glad I bought that stock. He says, I wish I wouldn't have bought the stock. Okay, I don't have any choice because I only bought the stock to make money. And if I lost money, I regret that I did it. But the person doesn't regret that they did the mitzvah, even if they don't get that which they had hoped for. So it's still driven by what we would call the purity of they simply want to do that mitzvah. So they have spiritualized, or they have utilized the spiritual to illustrate this idea. And if not, it's not going to go very far. Because if it's only out of obligation, then it's like anything. I don't want to pay more. If I go to the grocery store and I'm simply buying a product, I pay as little as I can. If I have a coupon, I use it. So if my strategy is what's the least amount I got to do and I won't get yelled at, it's not driven by the purity of the heart. So here it's driven by the purity of the heart. Okay. So this is present in this physical world. The only thing is we don't see it. And the classic analogy, which is one of the challenges of post the Garden of Eden, you recall that as a result of violating God's instruction, Adam was told, by the sweat of your brow will you bring forth bread from the earth. That is, in Gan Eden, there was instantaneous consequence. Outside of Gan Eden, there is an instantaneous consequence. As we know, impatience can be a virtue, meaning I did a good thing. How come I don't have the reward immediately? God is infinite. Why am I still waiting for this consequence to come forward? The answer is because we're living in Golus. You're right. It should really be that as soon as I do something, I should see the benefit of it. But we don't. And so the Alter Rebbe is assuring us that the virtue and the value of tzedakah is still baked into this physical world. But since we live in a world that is dominated by the material, and the material doesn't see the value of tzedakah unless it's somehow self-serving, again, it always says, what's the best thing for me? What's in it for me? So it may be prompted to do what we call loosely charity, but it's not prompted to do tzedakah. So when the person does tzedakah, he doesn't see the value. But the Alter Rebbe is telling him that it's contained there, like the seed. I planted the seed. How come I don't have the immediate consequence? Because we're living in a post-Gan Eden world. And in this physical world, we don't get to see the immediacy. And yet the Alter Rebbe is assuring us that it is still there. It's buried deep within it. It's still there. When Mashiach will come, when we will have Tchias HaMesim, and we'll talk about what the connection there is, which is the coming to life of the dead, then we will see the level called Seviv Kol Amin. I know that's a lot of jargon, and I'll come back to it in a moment, but I just want to get the details here. Like it's written in the previous letter. That previous letter is, in fact, incorporated here. It's in the letter of number 17 here in Iggeres HaKodesh. Now, what is this talking about? What is this? What's going on? So, why is there death? Again, because we are not living in Gan Eden. What is the difference? In Gan Eden, the spiritual is dominant, and the physical is subservient to the spiritual. So, while everybody can agree that some great hero, George Washington, is dead, yet his legacy lives on. So when we say he's dead, because we identify him primarily by his humanity, and his legacy lives on. And that's how it is even in the physical world. However, as we note, even currently within Torah, for example, in the Talmud, we always use the current tense. Rabbah says, Hillel says. Why? He said it 2,000 years ago. Because while, of course, we know that Rabbah, the human being, and Hillel, the human being, has ceased to function biologically and so on, but his message is eternal. So it's not just that he happened to say this 3,000 years ago, it's like he's saying it today. But that's a sort of metaphoric. We have to use our imagination. In the visual and in the tangible, what we see is that Hillel is dead and his life lesson lives on. So when we'll have Mashiach, not only will there be the literal coming to life of the dead, not only that, which is clearly the point, but that's the product of the spiritual now being dominant and the physical being subservient. We live in a world where the physical is immediate and the spiritual is speculated on. And the time of the coming to life of the dead is not just that there is this phenomena, it's because everything changes. This level called soive, that which is conceptual. Like, yes, Hillel lives because we're still living the lessons of it. I must have told you this story before on the first celebration of the conclusion of the study of Rambam's 14 volumes. It was the year that was marked 850 years since his birth. And around the world, there were many celebrations, even in Egypt, of Maimonides. And one of the speakers said, what's the difference between their celebration and our celebration? They're celebrating Maimonides, the great physician. But nobody is doing the medical practices that he did. Yes, like the Wright brothers gave us the flight, but now we have rocket ships. So we pay homage to the origin of 1,000 years ago. We are studying his Torah. We're living it. Our Maimonides is alive. It's the same Torah, the same mitzvahs, the same Shabbos, the same kosher, etc., etc. It's the same Rambam. He is literally living with us. So the concept of Tchias HaMesim, the coming to life of the dead, is not only, it's not limited to, not that that would be a bad thing, but it's not limited to people being alive. It's because of a complete reshape or refocus of existence. Whereas instead of the physical being immediate and the spiritual metaphoric and the physical being dominant and the spiritual some mystery, we get the reverse. Like at Sinai, when they saw the sound and heard the sights, that which is ordinarily or in our physical world distant becomes immediate. So not only does that result in the dead coming to life, it results in all of these spiritual energies that were heretofore trapped in the physical now start to flourish, now start to come out. The soive, that which surrounds, is distant, now becomes immediate. So now we're doing tzedakah, and we can see the physical benefit that this person has helped. And we also see, well, now I have less for myself, and so on. We don't see the spiritual benefit, but we have confidence. So when we'll have Tchias HaMesim and the spiritual will become dominant over the physical, we will see that spiritual sense of it. What we have to do is make ourselves receptive to it. I often quote, this is from Ariel, I think it's a brilliant insight. Maimonides, in his description of Mashiach, takes the position that everything is going to be the same. It's only that we're not going to be subjected to foreign governments. Otherwise, everything's going to be fine, the same. That itself is pretty good, but so people wrote to him, what about all the miracles? What about the wolf lying with the lamb? So he wrote back and he said, look, it'll be a progression. You know, Mashiach comes, it's a process. And if we will merit it, the process will happen much faster and we'll have miracles much more immediately. So Ariel, about 30 years ago, gave her, I think, a brilliant insight. He said, what does it mean if we merit it? It means, are we ready for that to happen? Are we ready for the wolf to lie with the lamb? Are we ready for the spiritual to become dominant? So we hold the joystick and calibrate the revelation of godliness. What are we ready for? That's really the issue. So we have to become, the phrase here, a keli omachain, a receptive, I don't know what the word is, a receptive container for it. That it shouldn't, as we would say, use the Talmudic phrase, freak us out to the point that we become non-functional. That's what happened at Sinai. God revealed himself. It was too much. We have to strengthen ourselves spiritually so that it's not going to scare us off, because if we're just frightened by it, it doesn't achieve the harmonious objective. The goal is for the physical and the spiritual to be in synchronicity. And if we're so scared off by it, or we don't want it, we don't like it, so then there's no synchronicity. It misses the point. So this is what Hashem does. He tries to make it accessible to us. The whole concept of mitzvahs is God saying, I'm infinite, but you can't deal with infinite. So I'll do my best to squeeze myself into things you can understand and touch and feel. And I hope that you, who are finite, will squeeze yourselves to be a little less finite and a little less self-centered, thinking only about what's going to be better for me. See how the Alter Rebbe continues. Like the body and the soul, that they are innately in friction. And here we have, again, hopefully we say it all the time, the whole basic message of Tanya, that the body and the soul seem on the surface to be at odds with each other. The body wants physical things, the soul wants spiritual things. So we have a bunch of mitzvahs so that our physical things aren't totally indulgent. You can't just eat anything. You have to wait 6 hours between meat and milk. You can't just do work anytime. You have to have one day when you don't. So that feels like a little bit of a trade-off. A little bit of the body, a little bit of the soul, a little bit of the body, a little bit of the soul. Chassidus comes along and says, no, this is a fundamental misunderstanding. It's not, okay, Sunday through Friday is about the body and Shabbos is about the soul, and you can do the body thing, but you can't eat this and you can't do that. But then with the stuff you can do, you can just body it, body. The goal is that the body and the soul should be in absolute harmony. And the analogy is just like a flame needs a wick. And we've seen this metaphor before. So too, the soul needs the body. The two have to be in harmony and function together. Now, that's very difficult because the body's like, I don't get it, what the soul wants. And the soul's like, I don't want this body. It wants to eat and drink and sleep. And the body's like, he wants to daven. So, okay, I'll give you a little bit. I'll give you a little bit. We'll share. But that's not the goal. The goal isn't to share. The goal is to be in harmony. So how do we get there? How does the body become receptive? So the portal of entry, again, very much relevant to the Parshas, is chesed. That's why Abraham is chesed. It's not a coincidence that, what do you know? The first of the character traits of Hashem is chesed, and Abraham is the man of chesed, the open tent and welcoming all those people. Wow, what a coincidence. And then what do you know? The next one, meaning Abraham, in order to bring godliness into the world, you got to start with chesed. It's like a parent and a child. When you have an infant, it's total chesed. You don't say to the infant, you have to learn to clean up after yourself, or you have to learn not to cry when it's inconvenient, right? That comes later. The premise has to be chesed, not just because we're old softies and we like to be kind and so on, because chesed is as close to infinite as we can. Remember, that's the basic problem. God is infinite, trying to squeeze into a finite world. We are finite, trying to get out of this finite world. And the beginning of that are all those right side midos, imagination, chesed, because chesed is, unlike tzedakah even, is limitless. Chesed is not just about the checks that I write. It's about a whole character. It's about an impulse. It's about just my identity. That's what chesed means. It's innately expansive. Now, again, chesed without discipline becomes lust and inappropriate. That's what we're worrying about right now. So the point of meeting is chesed. And again, not just because we like that and it's sweet and kind and so on, because it is closest reflection we have to the infinity of Hashem, because again, chesed is similarly closer to infinite. As we say in the Tikkunim, now you may recognize this because we say it on Erev Shabbos in the paragraph called Pasach Eliyahu began, where he talks about that Hashem has brought forth 10 tikkunim, the word tikkun meaning orderly, right? God is infinite. That's great, but I can't deal with infinite. So God puts himself in orderly concepts, 7 days of creation, 7 characteristics, the spheroids and so on. These are Hashem squeezing himself into somewhat relatable aspects. That's why God puts himself in the mitzvahs. We know what that is. I don't know what infinite is, but I know what Shabbos is. I know what returning lost items are. I know what that is, and that becomes the meeting point. So Hashem has laid them out. And what's the first one? Is chesed. And again, not just because we are defaulting to being nice guys, and because nice guys is a better strategy for winning over friends and influencing people than rigid guys. It's because kindness is more reflective of Hashem because of its infinity, not just because we think of Hashem as a nice guy, because of its infinity. So it says, to give to those, again, who are undeserving. It's that classic thing. It's the new kid in school. Somebody's got to offer them a chance to be participatory. Hashem gives us our neshama undeserved, just on the oath that we'll be good and not bad. It's a totally unprompted gift that comes from Hashem. Well, when we act in that way and we offer unprompted kindness, not a kindness that has been earned, that's what kindness is. Otherwise, it's not really a kindness if the person earned it. If we offer that, we are emulating the infinity of Hashem. Now, it's fearful because people take advantage of it. You could get hurt by it, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, we understand that. So does Hashem, right? Hashem makes himself voted, puts a part of himself in this physical world, a neshama, and we could do goofy things with that neshama and go bad places with that neshama, but Hashem is willing to take that risk. As it describes that the imagery of the human body becomes the model for our understanding of how Hashem gives us this gift. We talk about the right side, right? We see this right, left, and center. We can recognize this illustration. The right side are all these limitless imagination, chachma, chesed, giving, netzach, determination. Nothing's going to stop me. This is the model through how Hashem relates to our infinity. And as the poet writes, he is garbed in righteousness. But again, tzedakah, the feminine quality, not just that I'm right and you're wrong, but this idea of the tzedakah, the overcoming of self-servingness to be in service of others. Like the statement in the Gemara that says that the tzedakah is really only commensurate, or its value was commensurate with the chesed that is contained within it. As we know, a person can do you a favor like they're, quote, doing you a favor, or they can do you a favor with enthusiasm and with kindness, limitlessness to it. If they do it and they do it begrudgingly, you're still benefited. If the guy drives you to the airport, that's a kindness. If the taxi drives you, I'm also appreciative, but he's doing it for getting paid. If I'm not going to pay him, he's not going to want to drive me to the airport. Again, when a person does does you a favor, the character of it is linked to the chesed quality of it. Shnemer, like it says, Zoru lechem l'tzedakah. They planted for them as tzedakah. Tzedakah is a kitzroi lefi chesed, and the harvesting is like the chesed. Tzedakah, like planting, as we talked about before, you don't always get the instantaneous. The chesed is what changes the act from a begrudging exchange of goods and services, where I'll give it to you so you'll stop bothering me, or I'll give it to you so I can calculate in my head that I have done my duty. But the chesed is the consequence, or produces the consequence, which, like when you plant, you don't know what you're going to get. I'm not a gardener, but people who garden, you don't know what you're going to get. You plant, we'll see what comes of it. That's the chesed. That's why the reaping is the chesed. Again, if I give somebody money, he could lose it. If I give him the sandwich, he eats it right away. There's sort of an instantaneous consequence. Tzedakah is the gift, and the chesed is the attitude with which it is given. And again, we've probably all received gifts that are begrudging, and we've received maybe lesser monetary gifts that are generous and warm and so forth. Shakatzir hu gili hazriya tmuna ba'aretz. The harvesting is when you get what was otherwise hidden. You don't see it. And again, as we talked about before, we don't have instantaneous consequence. That's one of the sufferings of post Garden of Eden. V'kachu tzedakah v'chesed sheYisrael oisim is man hagolus. Hitmunim nestar it's man atchiyah sheyislavish v'yor Hashem tzayif baruch v'elam hazeh hagashmi. And this is what goes on now, as we know. There's an interesting halacha or historical difference. In the story of Purim, as you recall, at the end of the Megillah, it tells us that they immediately declared a holiday of Purim and Shalach Manes and so on. Now, in part, that was to stem off the next guy who's coming down the block. They wanted to have an immediate declaration. In contrast, on Hanukkah, it tells us that the next year they declared a festival of Hanukkah. They didn't declare it right away. Now, again, there's a narrative distinction, because how do you know when a war is over, right? It's not like they come and sign an armistice and surrender. So you don't know. You don't know when the war's over. Maybe they're coming back next week or next month and so on. A year later, you go, oh, I guess that's when the war ended. There is a profound life lesson, though, in the distinction between these two responses. Sometimes in life, it's like Purim. You see the consequence instantaneously. You did something, you see exactly what it is. You know, you follow through on something and you see the consequence instantaneously. Probably more times than others, most times, it's more like Hanukkah. You plant, you don't know what you're gonna get. A year later, in the look back, you see it, right? Again, if it's a Disney movie, so then there's instantaneous consequence. Ta-dam! Dramatic music, everybody sees. In real life, it's not like that. In real life, you don't just give them the lecture, you sit down and then they have this epiphanic moment and everything changes. In real life, you don't maybe only see that consequence sometime down the road. Yes, you had a question? You got to unmute.
Sorry. Thank you, Rabbi. You said before, you kind of summed it up. Tzedakah is the gift, and the chesed is the what with which it's given?
It's the emotion with which it is given, the attitude with which it is given.
Thank you.
Okay, so when do we see that consequence? When Mashiach comes, not just because that's a reward, but because then the godliness becomes dominant. When Mashiach that we'll see God and all that he causes, which we don't see now. Again, now we see the physical and we imagine the spiritual. And sometimes we get little glimpses of that spiritual, other times not. And we just have to have faith in it. But what I see is staring me in the face. But when we'll have Mashiach, that is, not just because Mashiach comes, everything's solved. It means we will completely reorient ourselves and we'll start to see the godliness and we'll understand that the material exists only in the service of the godliness, not that the material is real and the spiritual is some hypothetical, but that the spiritual is absolute and the physical only exists because it lives within the spiritual. This level of the 10 spheres of Atzilus, the most abstract level, starts to manifest itself all the way to the infinite light of Hashem that is usually Sovev. It's out there. Yes, it's a conceptual awareness, but it's not something that's immediate, that's staring me in the face, the tangible. Like we've used the analogy, if I'm asked to describe what's in the room, I talk about the people and the books and the desk and the chair. What about God? Oh yeah, that too. Imagine if we could turn it around and say, God's in the room. What about the people on the chairs? Yes, they exist in the service of Hashem. And if we could master that and bring this message to the world, that's the message of Geula. Lefikach nikras tzedakah lashon nekeva. That's why tzedakah is a feminine term, because it is receptive to the prompt of something greater. Again, as emphasized by Tzidkosoi Amedes La'ad. His tzedakah, that's the person, but is omedes. The suffix is feminizes the verb, while it's a feminine verb because it's a feminine noun. Shemekabeles ha'ora mi'orin seviv kol almin, that it receives from this abstract level that's up there. Hamaslabish b'soicha be'elam hazeh. That now becomes imminent in the time of the coming to life of the dead. Again, not just because it's some sort of random reward, like, oh, now you get this reward. It's because everything shifts to where the spiritual becomes immediate and the physical is understood only to be in service of it. And again, we all probably have experiences where we sometimes misprioritize the physical over the spiritual, or the behavior over the objective. We get so caught up in the behavior, we forget the objective. Aval tzedek lefon of Yahalech, you'll argue, we do have a male usage because the word tzedek is male, and that is hu lashon zachar. That's the male. So how could that work together when we say that there is the feminine quality? So we explain, he midas hachesed ha'meseres b'leiv ha'adam yatzman. If we say, or since we say, that the feminine takes what it is given and transforms it into something better, well, the male is the provider, brings home the wheat. So this is the self-starting level of chesed. And again, remember the origin and the theme of this letter is about the tzedakah collectors who are prompting everybody to participate in each community. Again, let's not lose sight of that. But here it's where a person can self-start on their spirituality. That is, when I say spirituality, I mean making the spiritual prominent and the physical understood as being subservient to the physical, to the spiritual. And the mechanism to that is through the Shema. That's why we have to close our eyes and think about the infinity of Hashem. And that infinity prompts us to feel love and character and so on. Till it manifests itself, that everything about myself, including my material things, are expressed of godliness. And when we will make this self-starter effort to Hashem, Hashem will respond. We talk about this a lot in the month of Elul, where we say, I am to my beloved, which suggests that I'm the prompter. We also say, the king is in the field, which suggests that God is the prompter. Well, which one is it? Is God prompting or am I prompting? And the answer is, it's both. It can be two different ones or two that function in harmony. We prompt and God responds. God initiates and we respond. It's not a competition. Isrusu de Le'ela, which is God's gift from above. As we discussed in the previous letter, which is really letter 17, it's this idea that the infinite of Hashem is manifest in this world, and that's what changes this world. The most primary dynamic of this world is finity. Things expire. Most manifest of that is death, whether it's the death of a tree that lasts for 400 years, or it's the death of an animal or a human being, God forbid. It's still, that is, time is undefeated. It's that idea. The physical is dominated by expiration. That's an absolute. The spiritual is dominated, the core characteristic of the spiritual is eternal. God is eternal. Godliness is eternal. So you have a major conflict. So now, unfortunately, the Gashmius wins and people die. When it gets rearranged and Ruchnius wins, a manifestation of that is the coming to life of the dead. But it's not limited to that. That is a manifestation of it. It's not the entirety of it. Bezel lefon of Yahalech, this is what it means. It will go before you. It will drive you. We actually have it again. It's a contrast of Noah, who God walks before him, and Abraham, who leads God along the way, the self-initiation. But again, everything comes from somewhere. Like Pirkei Avos, the first set of tongs had to be made miraculously because you need tongs to make tongs. So we like to think, I'm a self-start, I did it all on my own. That's not necessarily. And this is our ultimate goal, is to bring God into this physical world. So just like there's some people, they knock on the door, you look through the peephole, who is it? Then some people, you open the door. Then some people, you let them in the front of the house. You let them in to the family room, the dining room. And family, you let even into your most private area of your home. Well, that's where Hashem wants to be. He wants Atzilus to be here in this physical world without friction, without conflict between them. Should be total harmony and unity. That's what Hashem is hoping for. And again, now we got a disconnect because this world says, I'm here. And the world is dominant. And that's why, again, there's death and so on, which is the most prominent assertion, aggression of the physical. Well, when we can flip that and the spiritual becomes dominant, not only will there be no more death and the dead will come to life, it's because of this complete transformation where the spiritual is dominant and the physical is responsive to the spiritual. Okay, and right now the Alter Rebbe says, just like we always have to be as terse as we possibly can, we're trying to explain the most subtle of ideas through written words. And all the good that is there should not be lost from he who seeks only your benefit. So the Alter Rebbe is sort of acknowledging that we're talking about ideas that are almost too subtle to be grasped in specific words. This is the core challenge when we talk about Pnimius HaTorah, or what is referred to as Nister, that we're talking about things which are hidden, in contrast to talking about things which we can see and touch. So I can tell you which lost items I have to return and how I'm permitted to cook before Shabbos and on Shabbos because they're measurables. When we start talking about conceptuals, things which are not obvious, it becomes very difficult. And the Alter Rebbe sort of acknowledges this, and perhaps this is why the Sons decided this should be the end of this section of letters, because we recognize that there is always going to be a limitation on the capacity for communication of subtle ideas from the spiritual into the material. And again, this was one of the Alter Rebbe's primary hesitations about all of Tanya. Can I really write down in black ink on white page such ideas that are so subtle and innate? And this is the challenge of the poet. How do I express emotional ideas or ideas that are not tangible? They're not widgets. They're not instructional in human writing. And yet the Alter Rebbe does so with the confidence that we will understand it properly.